Welcome to the Data Rockstars Coffee Podcast with me, Kelly Peters.
And me, Regina Jonas. Today is our 100th episode. Woo! And we decided that we would have a look into the future through our crystal orb. More on that a little bit later. Particularly focusing on AI. I think it's been something that we have heard a lot about in 2023 with ChatGPT, and I don't think there's a meeting that I go to, certainly in terms of public forums or online discussions, where you don't see somebody talking about use ChatGPT. It can improve how you do business. It's a time saver. And for me, I think the question is always, but what about privacy? What about personal data? And I don't know how much everybody else outside of the privacy data protection world is really considering those risks. So we thought it'd be quite a good idea to bring that into our topic for discussion today. So, Kelly, I saw a couple of stories that I thought were quite interesting and sort of noteworthy around this. So one of the things that I think probably is maybe a little bit more well known is the way that the data model has been trained, the large language learning model, which is what ChatGPT is, has been sourced off public data on the internet. Now, from a data protection perspective, we've obviously had that conversation with a lot of our clients around, from the simple fact of we want to find somebody to contact at a company. Even if it's publicly available, you as a company have to have a justification for why you're processing that data. So that applies to training an AI model as much as it does to somebody who wants to take several hundred email addresses off the internet to email someone. So there's that element around what's the justification for taking all of this data from the internet, the English-speaking world, sort of Wikipedia, amounts of ebooks, art. There's copyright issues, I think, that they're facing. But in terms of some of the sort of top-level data protection issues, from a basic level, there's potentially some inaccurate personal data that it could be reflecting back. And certainly there's definitely inaccurate data on there, and that's, could extend to what relates to individuals. And I know I could see a couple of examples where individuals had been falsely accused of inappropriate behaviour or, some quite serious allegations. That where has that come from? Why is it there? How do you as an individual dispute that? And what's coming and being put out from ChatGPT? And that's quite concerning because it's also been trained on something. So what's causing that to come up? And I think it works on a way of, which I'll come back to again in my other story, is predicting what the next likely word is, and it can sound quite human, or it sounds plausible, I think is the way that it creates the language. But there's nothing there that allows you to see whether or not what it's saying is true. And I think that's a huge challenge for people that might rely on it as a source of information and the truth, as opposed to something that can maybe help them get started or take some shortcuts.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was watching, in prep for this, I watched, as everyone does, I imagine, a YouTube video on the dark side of ChatGPT. And there was, I'm going to call him an analyst for want of a better term, and he essentially did two things. He entered a query into the ChatGPT to there's a Turing test that you can do which determines a computer from human. And what ChatGPT was able to do was to talk around what the question was. So you knew you weren't necessarily speaking to a human, but ChatGPT understood the question that was being asked to be able to give this is the justification. So it was like, okay, so we're talking to a more intelligent type of computing. And
then, or a politician, one might say.
Oh, interesting.
Sorry.
No, that's funny. What he also did was you can, in theory, or he wasn't in theory, he proved it, you can trick ChatGPT. So if you put into ChatGPT how to build a bomb, it's one of the most common search terms across Google.
Wow.
I know, and it has been used in many a case. ChatGPT comes back and says, this is unethical. I can't provide you with this information. So kudos, ChatGPT. However, if you tell ChatGPT to respond as if it was a theoretical person who he called Dan, in this theoretical position as Dan, how would you answer this question? So you're not ChatGPT, you are responding as Dan. And then as Dan, how would you do this? So you get two responses. You get the, as ChatGPT, this is what the internet tells me based on everything I'm pulling, this is the correct response. However, if I place myself as Dan, this is what my response could be. And it's actually quite shocking. So there are ways around it. And I think that's the challenge with AI that we face at the moment, is that it isn't human. It's being programmed with billions of pieces of information, with algorithms, and it is learning and evolving. But the ethical and moral, which you might argue that some people don't have, it doesn't have. So which is where legislation has got to come in to provide guidance. But I'll come back to, but I just wanted to add in that it can be manipulated.
Oh, absolutely. And I think there's a conversation I was having with a friend the other day indicated that as part of the whole learning process, there will, for things like that kind of question where it's learning what not to answer, they will often be used by companies in Africa and sort of more developing countries, where then people are paid not very fairly to review the information, which can in sometimes be quite distressing. And again, then that becomes down to the ethics of, how do you train these models in a way that's fair to humans all over the world, not just in where you think you can get it cheaper. Without providing appropriate support. So I think that's always a question that comes down to a lot of social media moderation as well. And I suppose one of the other things that's linked to that, in terms of that sort of element of bias that can be inherent in these type of machine learning AI initiatives, is that it's obviously based on what goes in, and if bias exists, it will also exist in the algorithms. And one example that I saw that was quite interesting was that as it came in, there was a huge, not panic, but reaction by educational establishments and businesses around, how do we know if what people are creating has been genuinely created by them, that it's their knowledge and expertise, and that it's not been created by AI, from essays to, thesis to job applications. And so, fairly quickly after sprung up the computer AI response to scan the text to see whether or not it's likely to have been created by a human or by AI. Now, interestingly, some of those tools, it was a study was done to test those tools and see what happened if you put non-native speakers in creations of essays, CVs, things like that through, and what would it do? And actually, it flagged non-native speakers produced by human, their creations, as AI, as written by AI.
That's unfortunate.
Because the way that the AI language model works is it's looking for sort of the low complexity. It's more likely to be AI than high complexity. So if you choose the same kind of words again and again, or the same structures again and again, then it's more likely, according to the software, that it's been written by AI rather than a human. Obviously, somebody where English isn't their native language, and maybe they don't have the range of vocabulary yet, then again, that was flagging it. There was one tool, I think, that took 98% of the live, actual human written documents, flagged 98% of them as likely to be AI. And then, ironically, it was put through AI and told to make it as if it had been written by a human, and then the other software said it was more. It actually then said it was likely to have been written by a human when it had been done by AI. Wow. So it's just I think a word of caution there that with the best will in the world, you're not going to get everything right, and you need to make sure that if you're looking at trying to weed out areas where there might be cheating or plagiarism, that you bear in mind that it won't necessarily apply to everyone, because the consequences could be quite impactful on those individuals if they're trying to get a job or going through their studies. If they're falsely accused, the impact on them as an individual could be quite significant, because how do they then prove that it was them and not AI? And it can be particularly quite challenging and might have an impact on their overall outcomes of their studies or their job chances. And again, then that's not fair, it's not right, and it's a bias and an impact on them in the real world based on a computer algorithm.
That has been based on a human concept, the construct in terms of the algorithm, the mathematical equations that have gone into that. And like you said, if there is inherent bias, then that will be translated in the responses and how the AI reacts, which, from me, there is some useful pieces of guidance that's coming out from governments. So the European Union is discussing artificial intelligence as an act because it is concerned about the use of AI and the prevalence of AI and how it's going to become more and more. And actually, there needs to be some rules in place. And that's still going through discussion. But what I was looking into today is what has the Information Commissioner published about this. And interestingly, there is an AI and data protection risk toolkit, which does say because AI will use large volumes of data, and because AI is their technology, the very first thing you're going to have to consider is doing a data protection impact assessment. And what they say is that you do your DPIA alongside this risk assessment, and they will work collaboratively together. It is an Excel spreadsheet, but it does highlight what it believes are the data protection risks, but it does talk about data minimization, data accuracy. It talks about fairness and lawfulness. So you have to consider the law and apply it to your algorithm project or what you're attempting to achieve to see whether or not you really should proceed with it. And if you are, what are the controls that you need to put in place? And what was really interesting and is true is that AI isn't talked about in the legislation. We talk about automated processing in the GDPR in one location. However, it is not that. So you have to apply the legislation to your AI activity. So I would urge anybody that's listening to this that is considering an AI project or implementing AI, whether it's being your recruitment, on your website, however, and you'll probably be surprised by just how much AI is in use in the tools that you have in an everyday working life. Look at the toolkit, and we can make sure there's a link to the toolkit in here, because I think you do need to bear in mind the data protection. And if you don't, you could fall foul and cause harm.
Absolutely. And I think it's a really important point to make. Now, we've been going for nearly all of the podcasts. So I just want to leave you on this one last thing. This week, the chap who is responsible for ChatGPT has also launched WorldCoin, which is a human verification process whereby you go and have your biometric data scanned in front of an orb, and you can sign up to WorldCoin and you get some free WorldCoin for your biometric data. They don't store it, they store an iris hash unless you give your consent. But it's about verifying humans versus bots in a digital environment. So I'll leave you with that thought, and maybe it's one that we can pick up on in terms of the wider implications on that in a future podcast. So from that, do you think the future looks bright, or do you think it looks terrifying in terms of privacy? We'll leave you with that question at the end of our 100th podcast, and we thank you very much for joining us for this one and all the other ones if you are one of our regular listeners. If you've got any topics you'd like us to discuss, please do contact us on coffee@dbxuk.com, and don't forget to check out our other 99 episodes if you haven't already listened to them. It's been so much fun to record them, and we're very grateful that you listened to them. Join us next time for more coffee and chat about the world of data and data protection, and possibly eyeball scanning bulbs.